Yeah, so I want to talk specifically then about AI and the student experience in higher ed, right? Particularly that funnel that gets, students into the university, gets them through the university, and of course then as engaged alums, which I know is a area you've worked on a lot. That really seems to be the hat trick in higher ed, right? To use a hockey analogy, if you get all three of those goals, right? So how do you see higher ed using AI to help in marketing to prospective students? It seems like a lot of the work now, as you just described, right, is used as a tool, right? It's used as a tool to save time by, writing personalized emails and things like that, but not in transforming how we recruit and match students to institutions necessarily.
This is really exciting. I'm excited for the college admissions process to get a major process upgrade. We're going to be able to leverage AI and predictive analytics to find students that are more likely to be successful on our campuses. And it's the same technology that can be used to improve yield. And I'm also thinking about outside what the campuses are doing, these like outside influences that AI are going to bring to us. It's going to be extremely helpful in the college search. Not only will this technology be available for students, as their own assistants, right? They're going to be able to feed new tools, some really specific, unique criteria, and be served really well informed, highly personalized recommendations. So I just see this as a major upgrade for the students, as well as all of these, like you mentioned, process and productivity and effectiveness upgrades that we're going to be seeing in the admissions offices themselves.
It's exciting. It sort of blows up the notion of one size fits all rankings and you get your own personalized, tailored advice. Yeah. So we talk often on this show about how complicated, frankly, the student journey can be through higher ed. So much of it is, right, this quote unquote hidden curriculum to many students. How might AI, in your view, help us communicate better to students to really get them connected to the experiences that are ultimately going to engage them and lead to success?
Yeah, there's another huge benefit here. GPTs are really good at simplifying language. And I advocate for emails and websites to be written at a seventh to ninth grade reading level. And this is really hard for academia. Even when you show them data that says 39% of low income students don't know what the word undergraduate means. They still want to use some very like postgraduate, very complex language. And now GPT assistants are going to force this clarity. Either we learn to communicate better or students will use AI assistants to translate our complexities for them.
Well, I mean, this all sounds like a great promise, right? So, what are the hurdles, right? Right? How can it? Again, it sounds so great on the front end, during college, after college. This life cycle could be totally transformed. So, what are the big challenges and hurdles in making this actually happen?
The biggest hurdle right now is security. Very few campuses have a safe environment to run large language models with constituent data. And this is the first step to unlocking much of what we talked about today. But it doesn't mean that you have to sit around and wait. Just like any new technology, there is a learning curve, and you can get ahead of that curve by starting to use GPTs and learning the basics of predictive analytics so that you know what you want to feed your large language model and how to talk to it by the time you get your hands on what's sure to be a game-changing tool.
Yeah, I just love this idea of trying to not only improve the feedback loop and make it much faster, but also this idea of personalizing things. So, right, so if we make things faster and personalize them, I can imagine what we're able to do in higher ed. Ashley, thank you so much for being with us today on Future You.
And Jeff, I want to turn right back to you here for this last segment of this show, because as Ashley was talking, I had just a couple questions that I would love your quick takes on. But before I let you opine, I have a quick tip from me, because Ashley mentioned writing communications at an eighth grade level, and obviously she's written her book about that. I'll recommend one other book by Todd Rogers and Jessica Lasky Fink out of Harvard. It was called Writing for Busy Readers. But what was cool about it, I thought, was that they also have this website, writingforbusyreaders.com. We'll link to it in the show notes, that uses AI actually to tell you at what grade level a passage of your writing is and help you improve its clarity and simplicity if you want. I didn't use the latter function, but for my new book, Job Moves, I was constantly just checking my writing to see what grade level it is because I wanted to keep it super simple. But with that said, Jeff, let me ask the first question to you, which is, you spend a lot of time in this space. What else are you seeing in how AI is beginning to reshape that student experience, starting with the admissions office?
Yeah, well, first of all, Michael, glad that you use that website. I'm just kind of curious. Did you end up at a 12th grade level, an 8th grade level? Where did you end up most of the time?
I was pitching around 7th, 8th grade level for
That's
the
good.
most part.
It's interesting. I was talking to Michael Crow, president of ASU, about this. He's written a couple of books, and he said some of his books were at a 13th and 14th grade level. So he realizes that next time he writes, he has to kind of bring it down a little bit for most people to really understand what's happening in higher ed. But to get back to your question around what is happening kind of on the admissions side in particular, and I think right now it's what you had talked about earlier, right? It's mostly on this kind of transactional side, right? Think of the prospective students and current students ask, and so it's really around kind of developing chatbots for these and using AI to help answer those questions. I think that's kind of the ground floor now for many admissions offices and even registrar's offices and financial aid offices to answer those kind of transactional questions. I hosted a webinar a few months ago, and we had Michael Bettersworth, who's the chief marketing officer at Texas State Technical College. And he was saying that its bot in 1 month engaged more than 1,200 chats. But what was interesting is that it had a 95% success rate in ending the questions, right? So people found a successful answer to those questions. So only 5% of the time did they have to shift that student to a human being. And he said it saved approximately 2,700 minutes of staff time in that period they studied. So I just think it's incredible the amount of time savings you could do with that. And then I think the question is, what do you do with that staff? Does that reduce headcount in higher ed among staff, or do you then redeploy that staff to do other things? Now, chatbots are great, but they don't really seem groundbreaking to me. That still seems like, AI 1.0, as you pointed out earlier. But what follows, I think, is more groundbreaking in terms of how I think it can improve outcomes and save time. So let me go through some other things that I see already happening, being experimented with, and probably going to be put in place, I would imagine, even this academic year. One is reducing the work in processing applications, and two is determining which students are more likely to succeed at the institution, right? And to that end, the University of Miami is piloting AI this year to review essays that this fall's applicants are sending in. And what the university did was they built models using essays from 2 falls ago, so the fall of 2022 admission cycle. And the experiment's going to target students who remained enrolled from that fall, as well as those who left the university. And they want to see if there's any content in their essays that can be identified to determine which students kind of stuck at Miami. So it's really around a retention standpoint to think, okay, this student who wrote this essay more likely to stick at Miami. And
Jeff,
then Emory.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Can I interrupt you super quick there? I'm just curious because in your book, Who Gets In and Why, you talked at the admissions essays. People think that they're like the most valuable thing, but they're often not. Might this make them more valuable if we actually find out that there's some connection to persistence?
I think it could. I also think I'm not quite sure how big these models are going to be. Miami probably has a pretty good retention rate. So I think you're going to have to probably judge this over a couple of years. And of course, this is happening at a time, speaking of AI, when most people are worried that AI is doing too much work on admissions essays, right? So what will be interesting to me is how are they really able to identify if the student actually really wrote the essay. So I'll be kind of interested to see what Miami comes up with in that study that they're doing.